Welcome. This is our inaugural podcast for a show that I have not yet announced, but I will today. It is going to be called, the podcast that is,
Esquire Unfiltered.
Esquire Unfiltered. So I'm sure you've all heard the name Esquire after an attorney's name. Unfiltered, why? Because I am going to shoot straight with you like I do with my clients. I'm always going to tell you the truth. I'm going to speak, I'm going to say what I mean. I'm going to mean what I say. So I'm going to try to, on this show, do a lot of things. I want to explain the law to you in ways that make sense. I want to give you analogies. I'm going to give you diagrams from time to time, something I refer to as clients with the apple pie when I describe negligence, and we'll probably get there at some point. And I want to help our society to learn, to understand better, to sort of untangle the law, if you will. And to that end, you all, people that follow me and know me, have asked me tonight to cover the topic that I know a tremendous amount about since 2021 because of what the world went through, the pandemic, and that is religious exemptions. So we're going to do that. Before I get into the religious exemptions, I want to introduce myself. If you don't know me and you're watching this for the first time, my name is Greg Stapp. It gets mispronounced a lot, and that's okay. You will see it in the podcast. You will see it when you look for me on social media. It is S-T-A-P-P. You can find me on my website at www.stapplaw.net. You can find me on Twitter or X at @StapLaw LLC. I post a tremendous amount of content there. You can also find me on Facebook at StapLaw LLC. So with those opening announcements, I want to start tonight by talking about religious exemptions. So let's first, for those of you who are new, what are we talking about? We're talking about the pandemic. Now, these were around well before the pandemic. In fact, some cases I'm going to talk to you tonight about are from 1977, 2015. However, because of the pandemic, we had to use them much more. And the reason we were using them was because employers were asking people to get the vaccine. We here, again, I'm going to shoot straight with you. I call them, quote, vaccine, and quote. That's because they're not a vaccine. If you don't know this, I'm going to teach you that on August 24th of 2021, the FDA changed the definition, along with the CDC, of what a vaccine is. My understanding of a vaccine, and I'll just tell you now so everybody doesn't look at this and say, boy, look at his eyes or whatever and try and guess how old I am, right? I was born in 1971. When I was a kid, vaccines were things like polio. My understanding of a vaccine was when I got a vaccine for polio, I could be in a room full of people with polio and not get polio because I was vaccinated. I could shake their hand, maybe even hug them, and I was never going to get that polio. That is not the definition of a vaccine today, and that's not the vaccine definition they were using for what you saw that came from Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna. Excuse me. So what we had to do was employers across America and Pennsylvania were suddenly on or around July and August of 2021 uniformly demanding that employees get a vaccine or a jab, as people call it. I was contacted because I had already joined a Patriot Group. I was also working with America's Frontline Doctors, which some of you may know. I know America's Frontline Doctors has been mentioned with RFK and RFK Jr. So we had a number of people immediately in May of 2021 that were introduced to me to the America's Frontline Doctors that needed help. And from there, it kind of exploded. So we were getting calls at times, 20, 30, 50, sometimes 100 calls a day from people. As my name got passed around the Commonwealth, I was getting calls from Butler. I was getting calls from the Pittsburgh area, believe it or not, Philadelphia. Spoke with people from all walks of life, all religious faiths, some not practicing any religion at all, which we're going to talk about tonight. So very interesting times. And, maybe someday I'll write a book about it. August of 2021, September 2021 was particularly busy. We had 4 lines here. They were going off literally pretty much all day long from 8 to 5 with people like yourself asking for help. And what we were telling people about these vaccines, quote unquote, that they did not want was the way to avoid those. And this is going to be very important because it's also true for medications you may not want for your child, whether it's an MMR or some other vaccine you've decided you don't want your child to get. You can use these same tools. And that tool is a religious exemption. So what do we mean by that? There's 2 types of exemptions we typically refer to in this area of the law. One is called a medical exemption, and one is called a religious exemption. Religious exemption is one, and I'm going to talk about this case tonight, that is based on your sincerely held belief. So it's a sincerely held belief, a belief that you hold sincerely. In the case, and I mentioned this earlier tonight, 2015 case involving Abercrombie & Fitch Stores Incorporated. It was actually called EEOC versus Abercrombie & Fitch Stores Incorporated. And one of the things we're going to do in this show is I'm going to give you what I call clickable links. So we will put the clickable links in there when we post this and when we upload it. I'm going to give you the citation now, should you want to look it up. It's 575 U.S.768. It's a 2015 United States Supreme Court case. And in this case, Justice Scalia wrote the opinion and explained that the religious belief does not have to be tied to a religious practice. What do I mean by that? I mean Judaism, Muslim faith, Catholicism. This is a very important point for the pandemic, because what we saw even the Catholic Church coming out and saying we're pro-vaccine, just get it. And a lot of people who were practicing Catholics did not agree with that. And so when they did not agree, they looked to tenets of their faith to protect themselves. And that was the right thing to do. And we're going to talk about that. So in this case, Scalia says that, in fact, however, Congress defined, quote, religion, end quote, for Title VII's purposes as, quote, including all aspects of religious observance and practice, as well as belief, end quote. And again, that's citing under 42 United States Code, Section 2000EJ, which is where the Civil Rights Act is contained, or what we call Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of the 1964. So very, very important. And what's important about that is the courts have found that aspects of religious observance are just that. They are things that are part of your religious faith, doctrines. The Catholics have something called the doctrine of therapeutic proportionality, which I read because I had a lot of people that were using that. And I understood it as God gave you a brain and he wants you to use it. So that's a tenet of the faith. You can use that. A number of people, a very, very large amount of people use the idea of my body is the temple of God, which I believe they mostly quoted 1 Corinthians 3:12, which again we'll give you so you can see that. Maybe I'll give it to you in various versions as well. And essentially what they were saying was, my body's a temple of God. I believe that these jabs, or quote vaccine, end quote, are dangerous. And so I don't want to ingest them in my body. So this is how we fought these. You could fight them in a medical exemption. However, most employers were saying we don't care. In fact, I talked to a lady who was from a very well-known firm in Philadelphia. She had an excellent resume from schools that you all would respect if you probably knew. Although now I think we're concerned about these schools and what they're teaching their kids, particularly in light of the fact that one of the major voices in our society that was kind of fighting against the stream, if you will, with a lot of the teaching at these colleges is now gone. In any event, there was a hospital where they had a number of medical exemptions, and she told me they had only granted one. I think they had hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. She said we granted one. Most of my clients had no success with that. I had a young lady who was in nursing school. She had a very serious allergic reaction to prior vaccines, and she had an autoimmune disorder. She had major gastrointestinal issues. She did use the medical exemption along with the religious exemption, and that was successful, but it took a heck of a lot of work. So what we found was the religious exemption was easier. And you're going to understand why as I explain this to you. Because essentially, the religious exemption is what I've been saying tonight, which is it's your sincerely held belief. And it can be a tenet of the faith. And one of those that I had, this is a perfect example, had a young lady who was working for Geisinger, which is an organization here that we've been in lawsuit with for years now. We're on appeal again, trying to get to a trial on the issue of religious exemptions. They were the people contacting me in 2021, a number of them. I was very proud to say that with 300 people got granted exemptions that we know of for sure. That's just some of them from one particular employer. So I feel very proud of the fact that I know we saved a number of people's jobs. And this lady happened to be one of them. And what she did was she called me one day and she said, Greg, I'm not Buddhist. I don't practice Buddhism. She sort of admitted to me she doesn't even really know everything about the religion. But she said, but I believe in Buddhist principles. And so I said to her, I called her by her name, said, what particular Buddhist principle is it that is causing you pause or keeping you from getting the quote vaccine, unquote? And she said, the Buddhist principle that you should do no harm to yourself, do no harm to others. I feel like this is going to do harm to me, and so I don't want to take it. And that's the key point to this, okay? And don't worry if you're, sort of like, when you go to church and the pastor says, well, I hope you're all taking notes. You don't need to take notes about this. If you want to take notes, knock yourself out. At the end, I'm going to tell you, I'll sort of recap what we're talking about, make sure you know. Especially if it's something like this where we're doing a teaching talk. Now, I'm not saying they're all going to be that, folks. I mean, we may have some guests on. We're still trying to work out the format of the show. I think it'll be better if I have people come on and talk to me. But in any event, I'm going to give you at the end sort of a synopsis like I do all my clients. In fact, I had somebody in my office today. We got to the end. The client said to me, what do you think I should do? I gave him two very concrete options as to what they should do in that situation. So getting back to the religious exemption, it's your sincerely held belief. It does not have to be a particular religious practice. It can be a tenet of the faith. And all of these come sort of the landmark case we talk about, just so you know, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about how to do it, okay? And by the way, we're going to post this on things where if you don't want to hear all this stuff, you can fast forward. I'm going to shoot straight with you. I'm going to say what I mean what I say. I do it too. It's fine. If you want to skip to the end, I'm going to tell you at the end, I'm going to recap how to do a religious exemption, how to write it, what you need to put in there. But I want you to understand kind of the background so you get a sense of it. And that's what we promised we would do with this, was educate people. So the sort of the landmark case that we use is a 1977 case. It's called Trans World Airlines Incorporated versus Hardison. Now, a lot of you are watching this podcast someday, I hope, will wonder what in the heck TWA was. But TWA was a very large airline back in the day, 60s and 70s. This man worked for TWA as a mechanic. He worked at a very large airport. I believe he worked in the New York area. And he had joined a church in the spring of 1968 called the Worldwide Church of God. Never heard of it, not familiar with it. I think it's sort of like an unusual faith he had joined. But their belief was that you were not allowed to work on the Sabbath, which I think is a great practice. Now, in their religion, their Sabbath was sunset on Friday until sunset on Saturday. So basically Saturdays. As you can imagine, he was a jet mechanic working on jets in an airport. So here's the other side of the coin, if you will. Okay. So we have your belief that's sincerely held. What does the employer have? Like what do they argue, right? The employer on the other side of the coin, a tennis court, if you will, if you think about your opponent, they argue what's called undue hardship. So it's UNDUE, undue hardship. What the heck does that mean, right? What do you mean undue hardship, Greg? Like, I don't understand. Okay, well, it's like everything in the law. We have to define it. So the courts decide whether something constitutes undue hardship. We had a lot to say about that during the pandemic, and our arguments have only gotten stronger since 2021 because if you don't know this already, the vaccines don't work. And I can give you videos. We'll probably do a show on that at some point where I'll show you a number of videos. I've shown many groups across Pennsylvania that shows you that the vaccines they give you don't prevent you from getting serious illness, and they don't prevent your death, and they sure as heck don't prevent you from spreading it. But nonetheless, the standard for the employer is undue hardship. Now, in the original case that we're looking at here, it was one of the early cases after the Civil Rights Act was passed. The employer did win. And they won because the undue hardship was you're a mechanic on jets, planes flying in and out of here. Airports have only gotten more busy since then. Planes fly out 7 days a week. So we need you to fly out 7 days a week. So we need you on Saturdays. So in this case, he lost. Most of the time, the employers cannot prove undue hardship. It's difficult. What we saw in the pandemic was, where's the undue hardship? The arguments were always the same. Well, if you don't get vaccinated, you're going to put our employees at risk. And that's not true. Here's the part where it just fell apart. A number of people that I had, particularly Geisinger people, other employees. I have another one with a manufacturing company. Some of the people work from home. And, we were like, what are you doing? You're trying to protect the cat from COVID or the dog? Like, they don't even come into a building with other humans, and yet you're making them get it. So if you don't already know this, our world, and I think it still is to a lot of the extent, has recently bordered on the absurd. We're kind of like living in this very strange universe where down seems up seems down. Good people are losing and bad people seem to be winning, and that's not okay. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast too. I want to speak out for justice and truth. I want to arm you with things that you can use to protect yourself, and I want to help you. And that's why we're going to let you guys email us as we start this out. We'll see how much we get. I will try to answer your questions. We may get to a point where we do a show just on Q&As, where we just talk about questions we got and go over them one at a time. So in any event, that's what they tried to argue. It's an undue hardship. They do it with children now and these vaccines. I'm not sure that they're going to win on those in court, but they'd have to prove that it's an undue hardship. And that standard can vary depending on what we're talking about, if it's a health issue, et cetera. So in this case, with a religious exemption, you are going to argue that you have a sincerely held belief. And the key thing I want to stress to you, and I told this to everybody when they would call me, is don't get into the facts. Now remember, in 2021, we didn't have a lot of the information we have now. I didn't have the video initially that I'm telling you about, where I have people from the World Health Organization, I have people from Pfizer, I have people from these companies even admitting the vaccines don't work. We didn't have that in the beginning. So we didn't want to argue the facts. We don't want to get into a debate because some folks can debate really well, some of you can't. And so we don't want to get you in a situation where you're having to debate with your employer about fetal cells or whether they use fetal cells or not. That's not true. Now, again, we would arm you. And if people ask me, I'm going to give them to you. I used a North Dakota handout and one from Michigan. They were government websites where they said all the vaccines in the pandemic use fetal cells one way or the other, either in the medication itself or in the development. So what we don't want to do is argue facts. Do they use fetal cells and not use fetal cells? Doesn't matter. If you believe they use fetal cells and you don't want to ingest fetal cells in your body because of your sincerely held belief, and notice I didn't use the word faith. That's very important. So I didn't say because you're a Catholic or because you're a Christian or because you're a Protestant. I said if you don't want to use the medication, whatever it is, in this case these jabs, because they have fetal cells and you don't want to ingest fetal cells, then don't do that. And you want to argue that it's your belief and not whether it's true or not. Doesn't matter. They can come in and say to you, well, they don't have fetal cells. And you say, well, that may be what you're telling me, but I believe they do. And because I believe that, I'm not going to ingest it. As long as you stick to your belief, then it becomes impossible to challenge. And then they have to argue a case called the Africa case, where they try to say that it has to be part of some comprehensive religious worldview. And Africa was kind of the counterpoint to this to the case I just read to you, the EUC versus Abercrombie and Fitch case, which is here. It was kind of the counterpoint of that. So in any event, that case is being overturned widely now in 2023 and 2024. The courts are going back to it's just your sincerely held belief. So here's what you need to do. Having said that, we're going to get into the very specific instructions on this. And then, like I said, if you guys have questions, we'll go over the website again, and we'll let you ask those questions. So what we saw was we saw portals, websites. A lot of employers had those where you had to submit it by email. If you didn't have to do that, I recommended to everyone you write it on a piece of paper. So get it a nice white piece of paper. Write out your religious exemption, dear sir / madam, whatever. Write your religious exemption and then sign it. And you should date it too if you're going to submit this in. So in that religious exemption that you write, okay, most important thing I can say to you besides the belief part, belief, I'm going to say it over and over again, is keep it short, okay? Very simple, very short. In the law and in life, really, you probably hear people say things like KISS. If you don't know KISS, you should. I'm going to teach it to you now. KISS is an acronym. Keep it simple, stupid, okay? Not intended to be offensive. It's intended to say the best way to get your point across is to keep it simple. In this case, you need to keep it simple because you're trying to keep yourself out of trouble. And we're going to talk about that, okay? Because we've already talked about fetal cells. We're going to talk about the kind of things that I have seen. I've even worked with other attorneys. There's a guy down in Florida who did a lot of this that I watched his whole thing. He did for about an hour way back when regarding fetal cells. And they will try to challenge you on it. Again, we're not going to get into a debate. You want to say, dear sir / madam, write your thing. I believe my body's a temple of God. I believe that these vaccines are made with fetal cells. I am adamantly opposed to fetal cells because I believe in the value of human life. However you want to say it. Therefore, I will not ingest the fetal cells. That's simple. And just leave it there. You don't need to explain the tenets of your faith. You don't need to tell them when you became a Christian, when you became a Jewish person, which typically is from birth, but whenever. Maybe you converted. When you became a Catholic. You don't need to put any of that stuff in there. I had a lady come in, a very nice young lady, and she wrote a very long, single-spaced, like 3-4 page letter where she essentially explained her salvation story and talked about her marriage and her husband and her kids, and they don't care about any of that. They don't care. I mean, if they're trying to get you, or they're forcing you to take a medication that they know there's no studies on, and if there are studies, they're not sharing with us, and they know is dangerous or potentially dangerous, they sure as heck don't care about your personal life story. Okay, so like I tell clients all the time, this is not a friendly situation. You're not having coffee or tea on the porch or a beer at a pub with your friend. This is someone who's actively trying to force you to do something you don't want to do, which, I don't know about you, but I never thought I would see it in our lifetime. And I read The Brave New World when I was 19 by Aldous Huxley, and we're living it now. I'm very concerned about it, and I still am. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast too. I want to put out there ways to combat this kind of government overreach where they're trying to tell us what we can do with our bodies. You should eat this. You should drive that. None of that's okay. This is America. We decide what we eat. We decide what kind of cars we drive. Okay. Now we have laws and we need to follow those, but you can't tell me what to say, what kind of car I'm going to drive. I don't want to eat an Impossible Burger. Maybe you do, but I don't want to, and I'm not going to. So, and I don't want to ingest medication that I don't think is safe and it's not been studied, and it hadn't been. So, and again, if you're not familiar with this, you need to know right now. Couple very, very important things I want to tell this podcast, put out there on the airwaves. I've done it before, but I'm going to put it out in this podcast. What we saw was some very, I'm going to use the word scary. I mean, I don't know what else to use. It was sort of like my eyes got open in 2019. Going into 2020, I did my own deep dive based on an election law that was passed here in Pennsylvania that was very disturbing. And I learned a lot about our society. The further I went, the more I learned, the more disturbed I got. And then I saw what happened with the pandemic. I can't make this stuff up. The definition did change August 24th, 2021. I am part of a lawsuit right now in federal court where the demand to get the jab, if you will, was August 23rd. I mean, it seems awfully suspicious. I had people that were calling me who were United States Marshals who were being asked to get the jab in August of 2021. I had people calling me from the Port Authority in Pittsburgh, okay, the Port Authority. Got to get the jab. I had people calling me from universities. I need to get the jab. I had people calling me from the federal prison system. I need to get the jab. So if you're not following me, you should be. Hospitals, manufacturing locations, port authority workers, federal workers, all being asked to do the same thing at almost the exact same date and time. The entire country, if you will, America, was suddenly asked uniformly to get this jab. Okay, get one of these 3 vaccines. You have to get one of them: Johnson and Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer. Okay. And I wish the story stopped there, because if it did, you might say, oh, here's another guy, right? Greg's a conspiracy theorist. A lot of people said that about me. The thing about it is, if you follow social media, you've probably seen people posting conspiracy theorist 39 0. Like, we've been right every time so far. So here's how I can tell you it's a concerted effort, because it gets worse. So what happened was, as soon as we started writing letters, and what I mean by that was I would write a letter to go with your letter, where I would say, here's the law. I would quote these cases. I would say it has to requires undue hardship. In other words, you got to give my lady or my guy their religious exemption. You have to grant it. Well, they would send us a questionnaire. First, it was 5 questions. Suddenly it became 6. I was driving around Pennsylvania meeting with girls from nursing homes. By the way, I always feel like when I say that I have to tell people I'm from Texas, because I had a woman once who was in her 50s who got offended by me saying girl, and I sort of taken aback by that. But anyway, in Texas, we call women girls. You could be 70 years old, we still call you a girl. So it's not intended to be offensive. It is. Sorry, that's just the way we talk. We're from Texas. And no, I do not have an accent. You will not hear that on that show, but I grew up in Dallas, Texas. So in any event, we saw these questions come out. Okay. So you might say to me, okay, Greg, 5 questions. So what? They all had 5 questions? Yeah. They were the same questions. What do you mean they're the same questions? Well, I mean identical. Nursing homes? Yeah. Different nursing homes? Yeah. Owned by different people? Yep. All using the same form? Yep. Huh. Must have been getting them from somewhere. Yep. Federal prison? Yeah. Same form? Yep. 5 questions? Yep. Bayer? German pharmaceutical company? 5 questions? Yep. And then it changed to 6 suddenly. Guess what? All of them had the 6th question. And I can't make it up. 6th question. Identical. So it is what it is, folks. Somebody, somewhere, okay, clearly the government, how big the government is, how many people belong to that government, who all is involved, who knows? But someone was coordinating the effort. They had to be, because here in the ground level, us, the lawyers who see the papers, we were getting the same ones. And the guy, the person that covered Bayer was like someone who wasn't even born in this country who was asking for help. And I was like, my goodness, look, here's another form almost identical. So in any event, if you didn't know that, you need to know, okay? It is a concerted effort on the part of the government, federal, state, local, whatever. Probably more than that. And I hope that we're going to find out about that soon. But they were all doing it. And here we were, little old Greg in Stapp Law LLC here in the middle of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is the home of the Little League World Series. So we'll talk about that. But that's where my office is located. And you'll see that when you go on the website. So very excited to be near the Little League World Series, and I love baseball. So in any event, I'm here. I'm a solo practitioner, helped probably thousands of people at this point, we saved some lives in the hospitals too, because people weren't getting the correct medication. They weren't getting monoclonal antibodies. They weren't getting ivermectin. And we were just helping people. We were trying to provide real advice. I was saying what I meant and meaning what I say all the time to people that I cared about and wanted to help. And you can watch my video and you'll see that on there. And I like to think that every day I come in here, in some way, shape, or form, I'm fighting for justice. I want this podcast to be that too. I want to fight for justice. And I want to do that by arming you with information that you can use, because this is the information age. And if I can help you, and I'm going to give you these cases and I'm going to tell you what to do. Okay. So getting back to your advice, and again, don't worry, at the end of this, I'm going to do a real quick synopsis, and maybe you can skip to the end and do the last like 60 to 90 seconds and get the advice. So letter, if you're on a portal, you can write it on there. Dear sir / madam, put your belief. 2-3 sentences is fine with me. The only reason why it should be more than that, in my opinion, is that you're actually citing to or explaining what the thing is that you are talking about, like maybe doctrine of therapeutic proportionality, because the person doesn't understand. Other than that, I would keep it short. Keep it short and sweet. Submit it. What we did was we offered to send a letter where I would cite to Title VII. I would cite to some of these cases and explain to them that they had to have undue hardship. And if it involved the particular thing with the jab, we knew they didn't work. And the more I started getting information, and I used to cite to this one study of a very courageous doctor who very early in the process wrote a scientific paper that said that, I did research on these and these are terrible. And they're going to create a worldwide epidemic, not a pandemic, an epidemic of disease. And we're seeing that now. We have a number of people that have been injured by these vaccines. So in any event, what we want to do is we would send a letter, explain it along with your religious exemption. We charged like a flat fee. It wasn't even expensive. Wasn't doing it for the money. It was trying to help people save their jobs. And we saved a lot of jobs. I don't know what the percentage is, 70. People ask them 80%. But getting back to your religious exemption, the key thing that you need to do is keep it short, sweet. Talk about your religious faith, your sincerely held belief. And I couldn't tell you the number of people who would say to me, Greg, you're a good writer, or you're a lawyer. You write my sincerely held belief. Now, look, I appreciate that, but here's the problem with that: it has to be your sincerely held belief, not mine. I have my beliefs, which I hold very strongly. I can defend my faith using the scriptures because I've spent years, if not decades, researching that. It doesn't mean you do. You don't have to. The Buddhist girl didn't do that. She looked like she was relatively new to the tenets of Buddhism, but it worked. She came up with something that said that, and I think, to the extent that we can do no harm to others, that's a wonderful idea. I'm not sure that it works in every instance in life, but great for her. And that's what makes America beautiful, that we have this freedom of the free exercise of religion, and they're trying to take that away from us, and we can't let that happen. Part of the way we're going to save free exercise of religion is by doing things like this, where you tell them, this is my belief. Don't care that my church as a whole, which I'm not part of, unless you're in Rome with the Pope, you're not getting a say on should we do the vaccine or not, right? That's my understanding of the Catholic faith. Really, my best friend in the world is a Catholic, and that's how I understand it works. I'm not Catholic, never been raised Catholic. I've been to a Catholic church, but you didn't get a say in that. A lot of faiths have synods. They have groups that meet that the people never say in it, so you didn't get a chance in that. So it's your belief. So use your belief. It can be a tenet of the faith. Make it short, make it sweet, okay? You're going to submit that in your portal, or you're going to submit it by letter or email. If you want to hire somebody like me, I'm one of the few people who does it, to write a letter to go along with it, to say, hey, here's the law. Kind of scare them a little bit, let them know that you've spoken to a lawyer. I jokingly tell people that lawyers are referees to the world. If you drive down the street today here in our little town of Williamsport, like most towns, you're going to see a basketball court. You might see some guys out there, maybe even some gals, playing some hoops. And I love to play hoops. That game gets played very differently. And if you play any sport at all, I'm right about this. The second a man or a woman walks out with a black and white shirt and a whistle, okay, now you got a referee. Suddenly fouls are getting called. Things are different, right? The game gets changed. That's what happens when referees get involved. If it's a personal situation, if it's a work situation, a personal injury, auto accident, whatever it is, the second that a lawyer is involved, the whole dynamic changes, because now they're like, oh no, they've got a lawyer. So because we're referees to the world, they know that you're being told the law, you're being given information that's powerful to defend your rights, and that you could ultimately sue them. That's, I jokingly say you have to have Esquire after your name. So in any event, I hope this is helpful to you all. I hope that we're giving the information that you need. And as I promised, I'm gonna just quickly recap it for you. Greg, how do I write a religious exemption for my child who's in college, who doesn't want to get this but wants to be in nursing school? I did that. For myself, because my employer, which is a very large manufacturing company, has just asked me to get this thing I don't want. It might even be the flu shot. You're going to follow this practice. You're going to go into their portal or write a letter. Dear Sir/Madam, you're going to write your sincerely held belief. You're going to explain what it is very briefly. My body's the temple of God. I don't want to adjust that. And then you're going to say, because of that, I don't want to get this thing because I believe that. And The reason that you're going to argue is because of your belief. You're not going to get into a fight over whether the flu shot works or not. Don't debate it. Don't argue it. Do not say things like that it doesn't work, or I saw this study by the CDC, or I saw this article that says that. You don't want to do that, because they'll find an article that says the opposite. You need to stick with I believe, because they can't challenge that if that's your belief. Okay? They can come in with all kinds of facts. You could say, I believe the world is square. Okay? I don't believe it's round. Oh, but I'm going to show you all these satellite images and prove to you otherwise. And maybe in spite of all that, at the end of it, you say, oh, I don't believe that. So it's not possible to attack a belief. It's hard, as long as you stick to your belief and say, that's what I believe. Perfect example we talked about earlier, fetal cells. One of the arguments we saw, and I saw a presenter do this. Did you know that fetal cells are used in the production of Tylenol? Did you know that fetal cells are used in the production of Preparation H? And there's a number of other products, apparently, that these manufacturers use fetal cells. By the way, these manufacturers are probably part of this group, that's pushing this stuff, because they're all part of these larger corporations that own or have part ownership of these pharmaceutical companies. But in any event, I didn't know that. I'm sure you probably didn't either. And so I told my clients when they called and said that to me, I said, well, if they tell you that, what should I do, Greg? So, well, for me, I guess, I'm got to be good on my feet as a lawyer. So I would have said, okay, wow, didn't know Tylenol used fetal cells, but I guess I'm going to find another way to get my pain relieved. I guess I'll take Advil. So use a different pain reliever. I guess I'm not going to use Preparation H anymore. So just stick and be consistent with your belief. So again, short and sweet, has to be your belief. You're going to write that down. You're going to sign it. You're going to send it to your employer, and then you're going to ask them to exempt you from whatever that particular drug is that you don't want to take, whether it's some kind of vaccine, maybe it's a flu shot. So in any event, I hope this was helpful. Again, inaugural episode. This is what everyone asked for. This was kind of the little thing I used to do with a bunch of groups everywhere. Feel free to tell me things. Take no pride in authorship. So not going to get offended or upset if you tell me, geez, Greg, you mumble too much. You're not talking loud enough. You can do that too if you want. Like I said, I'm going to be a straight shooter. You can talk straight to me too. But for now, if you have questions about this, you can ask. And, we will try to get back to you as quickly as we can. And, look, if we get enough of them, we'll have a podcast about the questions if it's a particular topic. I do want to leave you with this, in addition to the synopsis about how to write a religious exemption and what you need to do. I want to tell you, we're going to cover a lot of things. I know I posted some stuff in there. Right now, there's a very important thing happening in our world. There's a lot of things happening. One of which is you're seeing President Trump go into Memphis, Tennessee now. He got to go into there by asking the governor for permission. That's very important under Section 12406. Again, I'm going to cover that. I'm going to show you some of that. And we may do that here in the slide when we come back and show you parts of Abercrombie & Fitch and show you parts of the Transworld case. But in any event, I'm going to always show you those statutes and how President Trump is doing what he's doing. We have a lot to talk about there. There's some laws that even I didn't know well. I jokingly say how many people before 2021 were going into the pub or the coffee shop and saying, I can't believe that insurrection that happened last week, right? Nobody used that word. Nobody knew what it was. But it sort of brought it back into our lexicon, to our vocabulary, to the way we talk. And suddenly the Insurrection Act of 1807 is becoming important, and people are talking about it. Judges are talking about it. Media is talking about it. Media that you probably shouldn't trust or listen to is talking about it. So in any event, we're going to be talking about all that stuff. And I think you'll find it interesting. I hope that people will listen. The more that I can teach people, the more I'm going to try to. And I promise you I'll get better at it. So with that, I will say good night, and we will see you next time.